It was past midnight in the peaceful area of Paco City. Rain poured like a waterfall from the sky. Everyone was asleep, except one person. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence. My legs! My legs are burning, a woman shouted, waking the whole compound. Doors flew open. Neighbors rushed out, umbrellas in hand, flashlights beaming. It was Anita, lying on the wet ground outside her door, her face twisted in pain, her feet steaming, literally steaming, as if they had been dipped in boiling oil. Cynthia, her best friend, rushed to her side, screaming, "What happened?" "Anita, what happened?" Anita looked up with tears, voice shaky. "I just wore my slippers, and then..." She passed out. The slippers were lying beside her. They looked ordinary, but the air around them felt wrong. Too hot. Too quiet. And then came the whisper, low and chilling, from the dark corner of the compound. "Don't leave your slippers outside at night." Long before the screaming night, there was peace. In a quiet part of Paco City, far from the roaring buses and endless haunts of the main city, two married couples lived in a compound made up of tiny rented rooms. The rooms were arranged like showboxes in a row, and the doors of two rooms faced each other directly, so close that if you opened your door, you could see right into your neighbor's room. These two neighbors were not strangers. In fact, they were best friends. Cynthia and Anita had known each other since they were little girls. They went to the same secondary school, sat together in church, and even sold roasted groundnuts side by side after school. When they grew older, they got married months apart. By some twist of fate, or perhaps something deeper, they ended up as neighbors in the same compound. Each morning, as the sun stretched across the rusted zinc rooftops of Paco City, Cynthia and Anita opened their doors at almost the same time. They didn't have to step outside to talk. They would just lean on their door frames, still in wrappers or nightgowns, and start chatting. "Good morning, my sister," Anita would say, with a yawn and a smile. "My own sister, good morning, oh," Cynthia would reply, stretching her arms. They shared more than greetings. They shared salt, kerosene, baby clothes, laughter, and sometimes tears. If Cynthia was sick, Anita cooked for her. If Anita had no money, Cynthia would lend her, even if it was her last N500. Anita was the first to have a baby. A beautiful baby girl who smiled in her sleep. The joy in her home was loud. Cynthia, although happy for her friend, sometimes cried silently at night. Years had passed since her wedding, and still no child. But Cynthia never allowed jealousy to poison their friendship. She loved Anita's children like they were her own. She even picked them up from school when Anita was late from the market. Their husbands, Obi and Femi, worked hard. Obi, Cynthia's husband, was a generator repairer. Femi, Anita's husband, was a barber. Their jobs were small but honest, and they earned just enough to pay rent and buy food. In the evenings, the women cooked outside with small stoves. The smell of egusi, ogbono, and fried plantain would fill the compound. Children played with old tires and empty milk tins, laughing and chasing each other. Paco City may not have been rich. The power supply was terrible. The water pump groaned like an old man. The road to the area was muddy during the rainy season. But for Cynthia and Anita, life felt full, maybe not of riches, but of love. Yes, the peace was real. But it wouldn't last. Because late at night, when everyone was asleep, something was watching. Something old. Something angry. Something that hated to see slippers, waiting outside doors. And while they smiled and chatted each morning, no one noticed that the peace was only sitting on top of something darker. Something was already coming. Life in the compound moved like clockwork. There was a rhythm to it. Roosters crowed at dawn, the kettle whistled from Anita's stove, and Cynthia's small transistor radio played old high life songs from the shelf beside her window. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Cynthia and Anita were not just neighbors, they were family. They cooked together, laughed together, and sometimes cried on each other's shoulders when things got too hard. The walls of their tiny rooms were thin, so they heard each other's sighs, prayers, and arguments. Nothing was hidden between them. Anita had 4 children now. The first, Tara, the baby girl everyone adored, was now in primary 2. Then came Emeka, who had strong legs and always kicked the ball into people's pots. The third was a quiet girl named Peace, who hardly spoke unless she was hungry. And the last, Hugo, was still a toddler who chewed everything he could grab, including remote controls and chalk. Cynthia, on the other hand, still had no children. But she never let bitterness enter her heart. She became Auntie Cynthia to Anita's children, helping to bathe them, teaching them to spell their names, and correcting them gently when they were naughty. Every weekend, Anita and Cynthia would sit outside on small plastic stools, slicing okra or peeling yams, gossiping about the latest happenings in the neighborhood. "Have you seen that new girl that moved to the next street?" Anita would ask. "The one with eyelashes like window wipers." Cynthia replied, laughing. Their husbands, too, were close. Obi and Femi would sit outside at night, drinking sachets of dry gin, arguing about football. They'd slap their knees and shout about which local team was better, while their wives shook their heads from inside. When one family had no money, the other stepped in. When one fell sick, the other took them to the clinic. If there was ever a disagreement, it didn't last more than a few hours. But something was beginning to shift. It started with little things. Cynthia began waking up tired, even though she slept early. She started hearing scratching sounds on her zinc roof around 2 a.m. Anita's youngest, Hugo, cried every night at the same time, pointing toward the door and shouting, "Hot feet! Hot feet!" The mothers dismissed it as fevered dreams or playful imagination. But then, their slippers began to go missing, only to return wet, sandy, and placed neatly where they were left. It didn't make sense. No one had a key to the gate except the landlord, and he lived abroad. One day, Cynthia picked up her slippers and found tinyish marks on the inside. Another day, Anita's daughter P said, "Mummy, I saw someone bend down to smell our slippers last night." "Who?" Anita asked, confused. "A woman. She was wearing a torn wrapper and she had no feet." Anita had laughed nervously, brushing it off as a dream. But Peace didn't smile. She wasn't joking. Still, they continued living their simple, shared life, laughing during the day, brushing off the strange things at night. But the truth was already creeping into their compound, slowly, quietly, and without mercy. And it had one rule. Never leave your slippers outside at night. The first time Cynthia heard the whisper, she thought it was the wind. It was around 11:45 p.m. She had stepped out to pick her drying clothes. The night was unusually cold, and the street was quiet, except for the occasional bark of a stray dog far off. The compound generator had gone off hours earlier, and the city power hadn't returned. Cynthia moved carefully, her wrapper tight around her chest. As she reached for the pegs holding her blouse, something strange happened. A voice, low, soft, and chilling, brushed against her ear like breath. "Why do they always leave them outside?" She froze. She spun around, but no one was there. The corridor was empty. Anita's door was shut. Every other room was dark. Cynthia stared into the shadows, her heart pounding. "Hello," she called softly. "Who's there?" Silence. Only the distant hiss of the streetlight flickering outside the compound. She quickly gathered the rest of her clothes, grabbed her slippers, and hurried back inside. The next day, she told Anita. Anita laughed it off. "Maybe you were just tired. That's how these voices behave when sleep is trying to catch you." But the voice was real, Cynthia insisted. It said something strange about slippers. That night, Cynthia refused to leave her slippers outside. She brought them in and placed them beside the plastic stool in her room. The following evening, she didn't go out at all. But around midnight, just as she was drifting into sleep, the whisper came again. This time, from under her window. They don't listen, they never learn. Cynthia sat up instantly. Her heart slammed against her chest. The window was shut, but the curtains moved, like someone had just passed by. She rushed to the door and opened it quickly, nothing. The corridor was quiet. A rat scurried across the floor and disappeared into a hole near the base of the wall. But there were no people. No one. She noticed something else. Anita's slippers were still outside. The next morning, Cynthia walked across to her friend's door and knocked. Anita answered, looking pale. "I had a strange dream," she said without greeting. "I saw someone walking around the compound. A woman. She was holding a bunch of slippers like they were baby dolls. And she was crying, deep, angry crying." Cynthia swallowed hard. "Anita? I think something is wrong." Anita nodded slowly. "Let's pray about it." They prayed. But deep inside, both women knew. This wasn't a spiritual attack they were used to. This was different. And it was growing bolder. That night, Cynthia stayed awake, pressing her ear to the wall that connected her room to Anita's. Around 2 a.m., she heard it again. Not the whisper this time. Laughter. Soft. Bitter. Female. And dragging sounds, like footsteps. But not normal ones. Like feet being pulled across gravel, slow and angry. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "God, what is going on?" Outside, on the corridor floor, 2 slippers turned slightly, as if something invisible had just tried them on. Paco City had always had its strange stories. Every street had one. A cursed well here, a talking cat there, and even one about a tree that swallowed a boy whole in 1998. But nobody paid real attention until the strange things began to happen close to home. It was Saturday morning, and the sun burned fiercely. The small market near the compound buzzed with voices, motorbikes, and the cries of sellers. Cynthia and Anita had gone to buy tomatoes and dry fish. Anita carried a large basket and Cynthia held a nylon bag. The noise of the market helped distract them from the night terrors, but only for a while. They were walking past a pepper seller when an old woman sitting on a low stool suddenly called out to them. "You," she said, pointing a finger wrapped in wrinkles. "Yes, the one in the yellow gown." Cynthia turned. "Me." The old woman nodded. Her eyes were a dull grey, and her lips moved slowly, like it was hard for her to speak. "You bring your shoes inside now, don't you?" Anita frowned. "Mama, how did you?" The woman ignored Anita. Her eyes stayed fixed on Cynthia. "You hear her now, at night? The weeper." Cynthia took a step back. Her skin began to prickle. The woman continued. "You should tell your friend to stop being stubborn. The woman of Ash does not like disobedience. She counts slippers, you see. She always counts." Cynthia stared, frozen. Anita forced a laugh. "Mama, Abig, we're not here for stories this morning." But the old woman was not smiling. She leaned forward slowly and whispered, 1, 2, 3, she counts them where they sleep. 1, 2, 3, until someone forgets to lock the door. Cynthia's mouth went dry. Anita pulled her arm, annoyed. "Let's go, Jer. This woman is not okay." But as they walked away, the woman called after them again. "Ask her why her baby cries at exactly 1:03 every night." Anita stopped. She turned around, shocked. "How do you know that?" But the woman only smiled, wide and toothless. They stood still, unsure what to do. Then the old woman's face changed. Her voice dropped to a whisper, nearly swallowed by the market noise. "When slippers stay out, they become hers. When you wear them again, you carry her with you. You bring her into your home. You welcome her." She looked at Anita now. "And your door is the next one." Without another word, the woman lowered her head and began peeling oranges slowly, as if she hadn't said anything unusual. They walked away in silence. Anita was visibly shaken, and for the first time, she didn't brush it off with a joke. Back at the compound, they entered their rooms without their usual chatting. Anita took her slippers inside, something she had never done before. That night, nobody in the compound heard the generator. Nobody boiled water. But the weeping still came. Soft. Long close. And this time it was not from under the window. It was from inside the compound. Inside. It was past midnight when Anita woke up. Not because of the usual crying from baby Hugo, not because of noise from outside, but because of a sound that made her sit up in fear. Shuff. Shuff. Like someone dragging their feet. Inside her room. She looked around. Femi, her husband, was still asleep, snoring softly. The baby was in his plastic cot. Nothing looked out of place. But that sound, it wasn't a dream. It was real. Shuff. Shuff. Then it stopped. Complete silence. She sat there frozen, ears sharp. And then she heard it again, only this time it was followed by a soft creaking sound. Like the back door was opening slowly. Her heart raced. She got up and tiptoed carefully toward the door. Her legs shook. Her wrapper was still tied from sleep and her mouth was dry. She didn't switch on the light. She opened the door gently and looked into the corridor. Nothing. But then she noticed it. Her slippers, the blue ones she had brought inside, were no longer by the door. Her eye scanned left and right. Then her stomach turned. The slippers were at the far end of the corridor, standing perfectly straight. Like someone had just stepped out of them. She stared at them. How did they get there? She took one cautious step forward. Then another. Suddenly, the slippers moved. Not rolled. Moved. Just a small shift, like invisible feet were wearing them again. Anita let out a small scream and dashed back inside, slamming the door. Femi woke up instantly. Anita! Wetting happen? She was panting, pressing her back against the door. Femi, something is out there. He rubbed his eyes, confused. What do you mean something? I saw my slippers move. I swear, I saw it. Femi grabbed a torch and stormed outside. The corridor was empty. The slippers were gone. When he returned, Anita was still trembling. I know what I saw, she whispered. They were right there, then they moved on their own. Femi didn't laugh. He didn't call her crazy. He had heard stories like this before when he was a child. But he never believed them. Until now. The next morning, they called Cynthia and told her everything. Cynthia didn't look surprised. She's getting bolder. The woman of ash. Anita frowned. What kind of spirit wears slippers? Cynthia looked around and leaned in. A spirit that died without shoes and wants to wear yours into your home. The room went quiet. From that day on, no one in the compound left their slippers outside. But even that didn't stop her. Because now, she didn't need to wait for slippers. She had already followed one pair inside. And she was choosing who to stay with next. The trouble started with a limp. Tara, Anita's first daughter, the one everyone called Little Mummy because she helped with her younger siblings, came back from school that Monday afternoon walking strangely. Her left foot dragged slightly with each step, and she winced when she climbed the stairs to their corridor. Anita noticed it immediately. Tara, what's wrong with your leg? She asked, taking her school bag from her. Tara hesitated. Nothing, Mummy. Nothing, Coo? Why are you walking like you stepped on a nail? Tara looked down. My foot is just hot. It's been hot since morning. Anita pulled her into the room and asked her to remove her sandals. What she saw made her heart stop. There was a black mark, like burnt charcoal, shaped exactly like a footprint on the sole of Tara's left foot. It wasn't bruised. It wasn't swollen. It looked branded. Femi, who was home early that day, bent down to inspect it. Did you step in fire? No, Daddy, Tara said softly, blinking back tears. It started from school. My foot was itching in class. When I got home, it started to burn. Did anybody touch you? Anita asked sharply. Did someone stamp your foot? Tara shook her head. Nobody, Mummy. But what? There was this girl, Tara whispered. I don't know her name. She wore an old-school uniform that was torn at the neck. Her feet were dirty, and she didn't talk. She just sat beside me in class today. Anita and Femi exchanged glances. There's no new girl in your school, Femi said slowly. I picked you on Friday. You would have told me. Tara nodded. That's what I thought. But today, the girl came in late. Even the teacher didn't say anything. She just sat down next to me and smiled. What kind of smile? Anita asked, voice trembling. Tara didn't reply. Instead, she leaned close to her mother and whispered. Her teeth were black. And her breath was like smoke. The room went quiet. Femi stood up and wiped his face. Cynthia, who had come in to borrow matches, stood by the door and had heard everything. She didn't enter. Anita, she said slowly. Let me show you something. They all followed Cynthia to her room. She reached under her bed and pulled out a showbox. Inside was a piece of folded cloth, old and grey with tiny burn marks. She unfolded it. In the center was a piece of paper with drawings, one of a barefoot woman with ash covering her body, another of black slippers turned backward, and one final image. A child with a burnt footprint on their sole. Anita gasped. Where did you get this? Cynthia's voice was quiet. My grandmother gave it to me. She told me the woman of ash chooses the youngest and the purest when she wants to stay longer. She marks them first. Femi scoffed. You mean Tara is cursed? No, Cynthia said. But she's touched. And that means she's not the only one who will be. Anita held Tara tightly. That night, Tara didn't sleep. She sat on the bed, staring at the curtain, whispering something none of them could understand. And when they finally managed to close their eyes for a few hours, they woke up to find something terrifying. All their slippers were neatly lined up at the foot of the bed. Even the ones they had locked away in the wardrobe. Nobody saw the landlord often. Chief Adiwale lived in the big flat at the back of the compound. He was an old man with quiet eyes and a walking stick. People said he had lost his wife during the Civil War, and after that, he stopped smiling. His face was always hard, like he was waiting for something to happen. But he didn't disturb anyone. He rarely even collected rent himself, he had a caretaker for that. That was why it surprised everyone when, one early morning, Chief Adiwale knocked on Cynthia's door. Boom! 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 Cynthia opened it in shock, wrapper barely tied around her chest. Good morning, sir. Call your friend, he interrupted. Both of you. And your husbands. Now. His voice was cold. No greeting. No smile. Within minutes, Anita, Femi, Cynthia, and her husband Emeka were all sitting on the landlord's veranda. Even Tara sat quietly on a low stool, still not speaking much since the mark appeared on her foot. Chief Adiwale looked at them one by one, then cleared his throat. Something has returned to this compound. Something old. Something I tried to bury. Nobody said a word. He pointed toward the narrow corridor between the houses. 40 years ago, that space was not empty. There used to be a tiny building there. A one-room shrine. Anita's eyes widened. He continued. It belonged to my mother. She was a priestess of an ash spirit. The woman of dust, they called her. She helped barren women, healed children, even stopped deaths. But she had rules. One of them. He paused and looked Anita straight in the eyes. Was never leave slippers outside at night. Cynthia swallowed. Why slippers? Because, Chief said, the spirit walked at night. She did not float. She walked. And when she walked, she searched for shoes, for sandals, for anything she could wear. She hated to walk barefoot. He tapped his cane on the floor. Anytime someone forgot and left footwear out, she wore them. And when she wore them, she entered their lives. Their homes. Their dreams. Anita gripped her husband's hand tightly. Chief stood up slowly and turned toward the corner of his compound. When my mother died, I destroyed the shrine. I thought it would end everything. But now... He stared at Tara. She's awake again. Emeka's voice was low. Why now? Why after all these years? Chief looked down. Because someone opened the wrong door. He began walking toward the back of his house and signaled for them to follow. They passed the kitchen, the water tank, and finally arrived at a small metal door. It was rusted, locked with a padlock, and covered in cobwebs. This is where the shrine ashes were buried, he said. No one was supposed to enter. But someone did. Cynthia asked. Chief nodded. My last tenant. 2 months ago. He moved out suddenly. Said he kept hearing footsteps on the ceiling. Said his daughter started talking to someone in her dreams. He bent and used a long key to unlock the padlock. The door creaked open. Inside was a small, dusty room, no windows, no light, just a cracked cement floor and something that looked like a mat in the middle. But it wasn't a mat. It was a pile of burnt slippers. Old ones. Baby ones. Men's ones. Even church shoes. All blackened by fire. On the wall, there was one sentence scratched in charcoal. If she walks in your shoes, she owns your feet. Tara suddenly screamed behind them and collapsed. When they rushed to carry her, they saw it, her other foot now had the same black mark. And outside the room, by the door, were 2 fresh blue slippers. Still warm. Still smoking. That Sunday, Anita couldn't sit still. Her body was in church, but her mind was at home, with Tara, with the black mark, with the room full of burnt slippers, and with the whisper she had heard the night before coming from the wardrobe. Even the choir's loud singing couldn't cover the sound in her head. Shuff. Shuff. That sound again. Like someone dragging worn-out slippers across the cement floor. She had heard it again at 2 a.m., coming from her children's room. She had rushed there, heart in her mouth, only to find all of them asleep. But Tara's feet were hanging off the bed, and on the floor, just below them, were 2 pairs of slippers facing her. One was pink, Tara's own. The other was not theirs. It was brown, burnt at the edges, and it stank of ashes and wet cloth. Now in church, she sat at the edge of her pew, sweating under her scarf. Femi sat beside her with the other kids. Tara had insisted on coming along, even though her eyes had looked strange since the second foot was marked. Strange and red. The pastor was already preaching, pacing back and forth on the altar, shouting about household enemies and midnight deliverance. But Anita was no longer hearing him. Because that was when she noticed something that made her skin crawl. She looked down at her feet and froze. Her slippers were gone. She was sure she wore them into church. Pink rubber slippers. She remembered dusting them off before stepping into the building. Now her bare feet touched the cold tiled floor. She quickly turned to Femi. My slippers, my feet. But Femi wasn't looking at her. He was looking behind her. Slowly, Anita turned around. There at the back of the church, outside the open door, were her slippers. Standing straight. As though someone was wearing them, even though no feet were inside. They moved. Just an inch forward. Then another. People nearby didn't seem to notice. Anita tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat was locked with fear. Femi grabbed her hand and stood up quickly. We need to leave now. But the children. We're all leaving. Now. They rushed out of the pew. Anita scooped up the baby while Femi grabbed the other 2 kids. Outside, the slippers were gone. But now, everyone's slippers were scattered across the church steps. Mismatched. Turned backward. Some placed directly in front of the gate, like they were waiting to be worn again. A woman nearby started screaming. Her baby's sandals were missing. Another man shouted that his shoes were wet and covered in ash. Panic spread quickly. The pastor ran outside and tried to calm everyone, but before he could say much, the bell above the church rang by itself. Dong! 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 Then it stopped. The air changed. Cold and bitter. And in the silence, everyone saw it, a woman-shaped shadow standing behind the glass of the church window. She had no eyes. No mouth. Only black smoke where her face should have been. And on her feet? Slippers. So many slippers. They returned home from church in silence. No one said a word on the tricycle ride back. The children, unusually quiet, sat with blank eyes. Femi kept looking over his shoulder. Anita held Tara close, whispering silent prayers she barely remembered how to say. That evening, Cynthia came over with Emeka. Their faces were pale. Did it happen at your church too? Cynthia asked. Yes, Anita replied. They saw her. Or something like her. And the slippers. They were everywhere at ours, Emeka added. In the offering basket, on the pulpit, even hanging on the choir robes. Nobody laughed. They all sat in the living room as the sun went down. The light outside slowly turned orange, then red, then blue. The street grew quiet. Too quiet. Around 9:30 p.m., Tara began murmuring in her sleep. Her body turned left, then right, then back again. Her forehead was covered in sweat. Let her sleep with us tonight, Femi said. Don't leave her alone. Anita nodded. At exactly midnight, the first knock came. K-pok-po. They all heard it. The knock wasn't loud, but it was clear. 3 heavy beats on the front door. Femi got up. Don't. Anita whispered sharply, grabbing his hand. Don't open it. Femi looked at the door, then at his wife. Maybe it's one of the neighbors. Someone may need help. No one knocks at midnight in this city, she said. And even if they do, remember what Chief said. Anita pointed to the brown paper Cynthia had shown them 2 chapters ago. The one that had old warnings written in charcoal. At the bottom, one line stood out now like fire in the dark. If she knocks once, wait. If she knocks twice, hide. If she knocks 3 times, run. They waited. Nothing. Silence again. Then, minutes later. K-pok-po. The second knock. Everyone jumped. This one was softer, but more terrifying. Like someone using their knuckles gently, testing, asking. Emeka stood. We need to check the window. No, Anita said again, her voice shaking. If we check and she sees us? Femi suddenly picked up Tara. She was burning with heat. Her eyes opened slightly, and she whispered, she's at the door. They all turned to her. She's not alone, Tara whispered again. She brought slippers. Tears rolled down Anita's face. What does she want from us? Shoes, Tara said in a flat voice. And a home. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Light ones. Slippery ones. Shuff. 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 Then. K-pok-po. The third knock. This one shook the whole wooden door. Anita screamed. Cynthia grabbed Emeka's hand. Femi ran to turn off the light. Darkness filled the room. Then, they all heard something more chilling than the knock. A whisper. Right under the door. A woman's voice. Dry. Tired. Sad. Who left these for me? They looked at the door's bottom edge. From the inside, a pair of slippers slowly slid forward on their own. Anita recognized them. They were hers. But she had burned them 2 nights ago. The door was still. Silent. But the slippers, they were there, still moving slightly, as if someone unseen was wearing them, walking around in circles. Anita couldn't take her eyes off them. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as though the house itself was waiting. I'll go check, Femi whispered. No, Anita said, grabbing his arm. "Don't." Cynthia stood up, her voice trembling. "It's not safe to ignore it. We can't just sit here and wait for something worse to happen." Emeka nodded. "We need to act. We need answers. Let's look for something that can stop this." Suddenly, Tara stirred. She had been lying still, her face pale, sweat soaking her hair. She sat up in the bed, looking directly at the door. "She's still here," Tara muttered. "I hear her, in the mirror." Anita froze. The mirror in the hallway, the one they never really looked at, it had always seemed a little too old, a little too out of place. "What do you mean?" Femi asked, his voice filled with concern. "What's in the mirror?" Tara's eyes were wide, yet empty. "She's inside it. She wants to come out." Before they could respond, a loud crack echoed from the hallway. The mirror, the one in the hallway, was shattered. Everyone rushed to the door, but it was locked. Emeka ran to the back, where the spare key was hidden, and quickly unlocked it. When they stepped out into the hallway, they found the shattered pieces of the mirror scattered on the floor. The glass had cracked into jagged fragments, reflecting the light in strange angles. But the worst part wasn't the shattered glass. It was the reflection. In the center of the broken mirror, a pair of slippers were moving. They slid across the floor, coming from the broken pieces as if someone inside was wearing them. Then, Anita saw it, a shadow in the reflection, rising slowly, stretching to an unnatural height. It was a woman, but she didn't look real. She had no legs, just floating up from the shattered glass, her face still hidden in shadow. "She's coming," Tara whispered. Suddenly, everything went dark. The light flickered, then went out completely, leaving the hallway bathed in pitch blackness. The footsteps, the same soft shuff-shuff-shuff, grew louder, closer. Anita reached for Femi's hand, gripping it tightly. The only sound in the house was the sound of the slippers dragging across the floor. They turned back toward the living room, but before they could step forward, they heard a knock, this time on the mirror. The knocking was soft at first. Tap. 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 Then louder. K-pok-po. The shadow in the mirror moved again, now standing tall, its shape more defined. And the whispers began. "Why did you take my shoes?" Anita's heart raced. She didn't know what to do. The air around them felt suffocating. "We didn't take anything." Femi shouted. "We don't know who you are. Leave us alone." But the voice from the mirror didn't stop. "I can't walk without them," it said, its voice now deep, hollow. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror began to move toward them, slowly stepping forward as if it was crawling out from the shattered glass. The broken pieces began to shimmer, glowing faintly. And then, just as it seemed the shadow would reach out to them, the house shuddered. The lights flickered back on. The shadow froze. For a moment, everything was still. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shadow disappeared. The mirror was just a mirror again, the glass hole, its reflection calm. But the air in the room was heavy, cold, and unwelcoming. Anita took a step back, heart pounding. What just happened? What was that? Tara, trembling, spoke softly. "She's inside the house now. And she's wearing my slippers." They all turned to Tara. Her eyes were filled with fear, and in her hands, she held the same brown slippers that had appeared before. The ones from the hallway. The ones that should not have been there. The air was thick with fear, but no one dared move. Tara held the slippers in her hands, staring at them like they were the source of all this terror. The brown slippers, tattered, worn, and stained with ash, were now in her possession. They shouldn't have been here. They shouldn't have been anywhere near her, let alone in her hands. "Where did you find them?" Femi asked, his voice shaking. "Tara, where did you get those?" Tara didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the slippers, her eyes wide and glazed. "I didn't take them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They were in the walls." Anita's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, in the walls?" Tara's lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely a breath. "In the walls of the living room." I heard the sound. Late at night. Like someone dragging something across the floor. Emeka stepped forward, looking at the walls. The walls? But there's no way anything could fit in there. Tara shook her head. I don't know. I didn't want to tell anyone, but I heard it. I thought it was just the house settling, but then I saw it. She stood up slowly, holding the slippers close to her chest. Last night, I followed the sound. The shuffling, the dragging. It came from behind the wall, near the fireplace. When I touched the wall, it was warm. Too warm. Anita's eyes widened. The wall was warm? Are you sure? Tara nodded. Yes, and when I pressed against it, I felt something inside. Like something was moving. And then, the slippers, they just appeared. Like they were pushed through the wall, into my hands. The room fell silent, the weight of Tara's words sinking in. Something was in the walls. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Did anyone else hear the dragging? Emeka asked, his voice tight. No, Femi said quickly. But after church, when we got home, I thought I heard it, too. That same dragging. I thought I was imagining things. The room grew colder, the shadows stretching longer. The wall seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, and the silence was broken only by the faint sound of shuff shuff shuff. Are we safe here? Cynthia asked, her voice trembling. If it's in the walls, if it's really in the walls, can we stay here? Femi shook his head. I don't know. I don't think we can. But where will we go? Anita's mind raced. We need to do something. We can't just let this continue. Suddenly, Tara spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I saw her face. Everyone turned to her. The woman, Tara continued, her eyes wide with fear. I saw her face in the wall. Right before the slippers appeared. Anita felt a chill run down her spine. What did she look like? Tara hesitated. She didn't have a face. Not like a normal person. It was covered in shadows. But I could see her eyes. They were black. All black. And they were staring at me. A shiver passed through everyone in the room. Emeka looked at Femi, then at Anita. We need help. We can't deal with this on our own. There's something in this house, and it's not human. Anita's heart pounded in her chest. Who can help us? Who do we trust? Femi's voice was firm. We need to go to Chief Nduka. He's the only one who might know what to do. Everyone turned to him in disbelief. Chief Nduka was known for his strange ways, his mysterious knowledge of the occult, and his reputation for being able to deal with things others couldn't explain. But he was not someone anyone visited lightly. We have no choice, Femi said. We can't stay here. We need to know what we're dealing with. Tara clutched the slippers tightly. She'll follow us. I know it. The shuffling sound grew louder, closer. The wall seemed to hum with the presence of something moving behind them. Something was getting closer. Without a word, Femi led the group out of the room, pulling the children close. Anita hesitated, looking around the dark, cold house. It felt alive now, filled with whispers and shadows. Tara's voice echoed in the hallway. She's still here. She's in the walls. And as they stepped outside into the cold night air, the sound of shuff 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 followed them. The night was eerily quiet as Femi led the group out of the house. The cold air was a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth they had just left behind, but none of them felt truly relieved. Every shadow seemed to have a life of its own, every noise amplified in the silence of the dark street. We can't go back in there, Anita said, her voice trembling. We can't. I know, Femi answered, his voice firm but filled with uncertainty. But we need answers. We need to know what we're dealing with before it gets worse. The group walked briskly, Tara still clutching the slippers tightly in her hands. They kept glancing over their shoulders, as though the woman from the mirror, the one with the shadowy face, might appear behind them at any moment. The journey to Chief Nduka's house was quiet, but the tension between them was palpable. Cynthia, Emeka, and Anita exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke. They were all too afraid of what was to come. As they reached Chief Nduka's compound, they stopped at the gate. The house was large, old, and covered in vines, the windows dark and foreboding. The air around it felt heavier, as though the very ground beneath their feet was warning them to turn back. Femi stepped forward and knocked on the large wooden door. The sound echoed through the night, loud and unsettling. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the dim light of the house. Chief Nduka was tall, with deep-set eyes that glowed in the dark, his face lined with age and wisdom. His presence alone seemed to make the world around them grow still. "You've come," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "I knew you would." "How did you know?" Emeka asked, his voice tight with fear. "Because this city has its secrets," Chief Nduka replied, stepping aside to let them in. "And I have seen the signs." Inside, the house was even darker. The only light came from flickering candles placed in strange patterns around the room. The air smelled of incense and something older, something that made Anita's skin crawl. "We need your help," Femi said, his voice urgent. "There's something in our house, something we don't understand. It's in the walls, moving, and we can't escape it. It's been following us, and we don't know what to do." Chief Nduka listened carefully, his eyes never leaving Femi's face. When he spoke, his voice was grave. "You've opened the door," he said softly. "The slippers, they are not just a symbol. They are the key. The key to something much older, something far more dangerous." Anita felt her heart race. "What do you mean? What do we need to do?" Chief Nduka's gaze darkened. "In your house, there is a hidden door. A secret door. It's been there for a long time, hidden behind the walls, waiting. It is the source of this presence. The slippers, they belong to the spirit trapped behind that door." "Why did it come to us?" Cynthia asked, her voice shaking. "Why us? Why our family?" Chief Nduka sighed deeply, as though he had been waiting for this question. "Because you were chosen. By the spirit, or perhaps by fate. But it does not matter now. The spirit is restless. And once it has found a way out, it will not stop until it has what it seeks." "Which is what?" Femi asked. Chief Nduka paused before answering, his voice low and heavy. "Her shoes. Her life. She wants to live again." Anita felt a chill spread through her. "Who is she?" The chief looked at her with pity. "She is a woman who once lived here, long before your time. She died, tragically. But her spirit never left. It has waited in the walls, trapped by an old curse. And now, the curse is unraveling." A long silence filled the room as the weight of his words sank in. "What can we do?" Emeka asked. "The only way to stop her," Chief Nduka said, "is to find the secret door and lock it again. But be warned, once you open the door, there is no going back. The spirit will fight to escape. It will use everything it can to stop you." Anita's heart pounded. "How do we find the door?" "You must return to your house," Chief Nduka said. "And search the walls. But be careful. The spirit will make you see things. It will try to deceive you. Trust nothing and no one. Only when you find the door will you be able to close it." He stood up and walked toward a small wooden chest at the far side of the room. He opened it, revealing a small, ancient key. "This key will unlock the door," he said, handing it to Femi. "But remember, if the door opens, so will the curse. There is no turning back." The key felt cold in Femi's hand, its weight heavy with the knowledge of what it could unlock. "Go now," Chief Nduka said, his voice firm. "Find the door. And if you can, end this nightmare before it consumes you all." With that, they left the house, the key in Femi's pocket, their minds filled with dread. As they walked back to their house, the air seemed even colder, the silence deeper. And with each step, the sound of shuffling slippers grew louder in their ears. Would they find the secret door before it was too late? And would they be able to stop what had already been set in motion? The journey back to their house was long and filled with an eerie silence. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the very air was thickening with something unseen, something watching them. With every step, Tara gripped the slippers tighter, as if holding onto them might keep the terror at bay. "Do you feel that?" Anita whispered as they neared the house. "It's like the air is heavier." Femi didn't answer. His mind was racing with the weight of Chief Nduka's words, the warning about the curse and the hidden door. His fingers clutched the key in his pocket, its cold surface grounding him, but also reminding him of the danger that awaited them. "We need to be careful," he said after a long pause. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." As they reached the front door, Tara stopped. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "She's still there," she said in a hushed voice. "I can feel her in the walls." Anita placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. We're here now. We'll end this." They entered the house cautiously, the sound of the door creaking behind them echoing through the dark rooms. The place felt colder now, the shadows longer and more oppressive. Every corner seemed to hide something, and every creak of the floorboard set their nerves on edge. "Let's go to the living room," Femi suggested, his voice tense. "We'll start there." They moved slowly through the house, the walls seeming to close in around them. When they reached the living room, the faint, unsettling sound of shuffling began again. It was barely perceptible at first, just a faint dragging noise, but it grew louder the closer they got to the wall near the fireplace. "This is it," Femi said, his voice almost a whisper. He took the key out of his pocket, feeling the weight of it once more. "We have to find the door." Tara, still holding the slippers, stepped forward. She placed a hand on the wall, her fingers trembling as they traced the cold surface. "It's here," she said, her voice low. "It's definitely here." Anita stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "How do we open it?" Femi looked at the wall, his eye scanning the area. There were no obvious markings, no sign of a door, but he knew, deep down, that it was there. Chief Nduka's words echoed in his mind, "Trust nothing. Only when you find the door will you be able to close it." "Let's start by moving the bookshelf," he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his mind. They pushed the bookshelf away from the wall. It moved with a heavy, reluctant groan, revealing a section of the wall that looked different from the rest. The texture was rougher, almost like stone, and there was a faint outline where something had once been. Tara's breath caught in her throat. "This is it," she whispered. Femi knelt down, placing the key into a small, almost invisible lock embedded in the stone. With a soft click, the wall shifted, and a narrow door appeared before them. It was old, its wood darkened with age, and the edges were worn, as though it had been opened many times before. Anita's heart raced. Is it really the door?" Femi didn't answer. He simply reached out and turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow, dimly lit hallway that led into complete darkness. A cold wind rushed from the opening, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable scent of decay. The air was thick, oppressive, and it felt as if the very walls were alive, watching them, waiting for them to step inside. "Do we really have to go in?" Cynthia asked, her voice barely audible. "It feels wrong, like something's pulling us in." Femi took a deep breath, his fingers still gripping the cold key. He could feel the weight of the decision, the danger of what lay beyond the door. But there was no turning back now. "We have no choice," he said quietly. "We have to stop this. We have to close it for good." One by one, they stepped into the hallway, the door creaking shut behind them. The air grew colder with each step they took, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch forever, but there was no turning back now. They had to find the source of the curse, the woman trapped in the walls. As they moved forward, the walls seemed to shift, the shadows growing thicker, more alive. The shuffling sound that had been following them grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the very walls around them now, pounding, scratching, as though something was trying to break free. "We're getting closer," Femi muttered under his breath, his hand gripping the key tightly. "We have to find the end." And then, they saw it. At the end of the hallway was a large, ornate door. It looked like something from another time, ancient, yet oddly beautiful, with carvings of faces twisted in agony. The door seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, beckoning them forward. Tara stepped forward, her voice trembling. This is it. This is where she's been. The sound of shuffling stopped, and for a moment, there was complete silence. But then, just as Tara reached out to touch the door, a cold, whispering voice echoed from the darkness behind them. You shouldn't have come. The voice was low, guttural, and filled with malice. They froze, every muscle in their bodies locking in fear. The voice came again, clearer this time. Leave while you still can. But it was too late. The door in front of them creaked open, and the darkness beyond seemed to swallow them whole. The door creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the very core of their being. Femi stood frozen, the key still clutched tightly in his hand, his breath shallow. Tara, Anita, Emeka, and Cynthia stood behind him, all wide-eyed, as the darkness beyond the door seemed to press in on them, alive and breathing. Should we go in? Anita whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with fear. Before Femi could answer, a cold wind rushed out from the dark corridor, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something ancient and decayed. The air felt thick, as though something was moving just out of sight, something that had been waiting for them. We have no choice, Femi said, his voice stronger than he felt. We have to stop this. Whatever happens, we finish this tonight. With a deep breath, he stepped through the door, his footfall echoing in the hollow silence of the dark passageway. One by one, the others followed, the door creaking shut behind them, leaving them in a world of shadows and whispers. The air was suffocating, and the further they walked, the darker the path became. The walls around them seemed to close in, the narrow hallway stretching endlessly into the gloom. Each step they took was heavier, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on them. What is this place? Cynthia whispered, her voice quivering. It feels wrong. It's the spirit's domain, Femi said, though he wasn't sure he truly understood the meaning of his own words. This is where she's been. Where she's been trapped. But as he said the words, a low, guttural laugh echoed in the darkness around them. It was a laugh that didn't belong to any of them. It sounded distant yet all-encompassing, as though it came from every direction, from every corner of the space around them. Tara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. It's her, she breathed, her eyes wide with terror. Who? Emeka asked, his voice tight. She's here, Tara whispered. The woman, she's here. And then, they saw it. A faint glow appeared at the end of the hallway, faint but growing stronger with each passing second. The light seemed unnatural, almost like fireflies in the distance. But as they moved toward it, the shadows deepened, swirling around them like a cloak. The air became heavier still, and a sense of suffocating dread settled in their chests. As they reached the source of the light, they saw the figure. It was a woman, standing alone in the center of the dark room. Her back was to them, but they could see her silhouette clearly in the eerie glow. Her hair was long and tangled, her body thin and hunched, and the clothes she wore were tattered, as though they had been torn apart over time. And then, slowly, she turned to face them. Femi's heart skipped a beat. The woman's face was pale, her eyes wide and empty, devoid of life. Her skin was stretched tight across her skull, and her lips were pulled back in a grotesque grin, showing teeth that were yellowed and sharp. The air turned cold as the woman's gaze locked onto theirs. A chill ran down their spines, and for a moment, they felt paralyzed, as though they were trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. You've come for me, haven't you? The woman's voice was hollow, distant, like an echo from a place beyond the living world. You think you can stop me? Femi's hand tightened around the key. We're not here to free you, he said, his voice firm despite the fear gripping his chest. We're here to put an end to this, forever. The woman's grin widened, the edges of her lips stretching impossibly far. You cannot stop me, she whispered, her voice curling around them like a snake. You've already opened the door. You've already let me in. Tara stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. What do you want from us? She demanded. What is it you want? The woman's hollow eyes seemed to glow with a malicious light. I want to live again. She took a step toward them, her feet making no sound against the cold stone floor. I was trapped, buried alive in these walls, and now I'm free. But I need one thing from you, one last thing to make it complete. What is it? Emeka asked, his voice strained with both fear and anger. What do you want? The woman stepped closer, her face now inches from Femi's. Her breath was cold, and it smelled of death. The slippers. Her voice was a mere whisper, but it seemed to reverberate in the very air around them. I need them. They are the key to my return. Tara instinctively clutched the slippers closer to her chest, her fingers digging into the fabric. I won't give them to you, she spat, her voice filled with defiance. The woman's smile faltered, and for a moment, her eyes glinted with something darker, more dangerous. You don't have a choice. The shadows around her seemed to writhe, as though they were alive, swirling around her in an unsettling dance. You have already opened the door. You've already let me in. Now, you must give me what I need, or I will take it from you. The ground beneath them trembled, a deep rumble that shook the walls and sent a wave of fear through their bones. The woman's figure blurred for a moment, her form twisting and distorting as though it were made of smoke. Femi's heart raced. We have to stop her, he whispered urgently. We can't let her take the slippers. We can't let her win. But before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet cracked open with a deafening sound, and from the depths of the earth, something dark and terrible began to rise. The earth trembled beneath their feet as the ground cracked open with a deafening roar. The walls of the narrow hallway seemed to pulse, like the beating of a heart deep within the darkness. Femi, Tara, Anita, Cynthia, and Emeka stood frozen, their eyes wide with terror as the air thickened with a sense of impending doom. The woman before them, her form now shifting and flickering like a candle in the wind, smiled wickedly, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You think you can stop me, she hissed, her voice like the sound of broken glass scraping across stone. You've already set everything in motion. The curse has begun. The darkness is awakening. Femi's mind raced as the ground beneath them rumbled again, this time louder and more forceful. Something was coming from below, something ancient and powerful. The key in his pocket grew cold, almost painfully so, and he instinctively gripped it tighter, feeling its weight as though it held the fate of everything they cared about. We can't let her have it, Femi whispered, his voice tight with determination. We have to stop her before it's too late. Tara clutched the slippers to her chest, her knuckles white. I won't let her take them, she said, her voice shaking but firm. They're ours. We're not going to let her win. The woman laughed again, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to come from every direction. You don't understand, do you, she said, her voice dripping with malice. You've already lost. There is no winning. The darkness has been set free. The curse is upon you all. As she spoke, the air around them grew colder, the shadows deepening and swirling. The ground cracked further, and from the blackened earth, dark tendrils began to emerge, writhing like snakes, reaching for them with an insatiable hunger. Femi's heart pounded in his chest. What is that? He demanded, his voice barely audible above the rumbling chaos. The woman's eyes flickered with an eerie glow as she took a slow, deliberate step toward them. That is what you have unleashed. She extended a hand toward the swirling darkness. The thing that will consume this world and everything in it. The tendrils of darkness reached higher now, curling and twisting toward the ceiling. They seemed to be alive, pulsing with energy, as if they had a mind of their own. Each movement they made sent a wave of dread through the air, their presence a cold reminder of the danger they were facing. Tara's grip on the slippers tightened, her fear now mingling with a fierce resolve. We can't let it happen, she whispered. We can't let this be the end. We need to close the door, Femi said, his voice hard. We need to find a way to seal it before it's too late. Anita stepped forward, her face pale but determined. But how? She asked, her voice trembling. How do we close it if we can't even stop her from taking the slippers? The woman's grin widened. There is no closing it, she sneered. The curse is already upon you. The door has been opened, and there is no going back. But even as she spoke, Femi noticed something. The shadows seemed to waver around the woman, flickering like a flame on the verge of dying out. Her smile faltered for a brief moment, and for the first time, Femi saw fear in her eyes. "What's happening?" Cynthia asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. "I don't know," Femi said, his eyes narrowing. "But we can't let up now. We have to finish this." Tara, still clutching the slippers, took a step back, her eyes darting between the woman and the swirling darkness. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" The woman's face twisted into a mask of rage. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice echoing through the hallway. "You've already sealed your fate. The curse is set, and it will devour everything." Femi turned to the others, his face grim. "We need to act fast," he said. "We have to stop her now, before she gets any stronger." Tara nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "We won't let her win." With that, they moved forward, the darkness pressing in around them. The tendrils of shadow reached for them, but Femi and the others pushed forward, refusing to let the terror overwhelm them. Each step they took seemed to draw them closer to the heart of the curse, but they knew they had no choice. They had to finish this. As they reached the woman, the darkness grew more intense. The shadows were no longer just swirling, they were alive, moving like tendrils of smoke, crawling toward them with an insidious purpose. "We can't stop it," Anita cried, her voice filled with panic. "It's too powerful." Femi didn't stop. He grabbed Tara's hand, his voice low but firm. "We have to find a way to stop it. Whatever it takes, we end this here." The woman's laughter rang out again, more menacing this time. "You think you can stop it?" she taunted. "You think you can stop me?" And then, as if on cue, the darkness surged forward, rushing toward them like a tidal wave, eager to consume everything in its path. But then, just as the darkness seemed ready to overtake them, Femi's hand shot out, his fingers brushing against the key in his pocket. The key, it had to be the answer. It had to be the way to close the door. With a swift motion, Femi pulled the key from his pocket and held it high. The key began to glow faintly, its surface shimmering with a strange, otherworldly light. The darkness recoiled at the sight of it, as though it were afraid, as though it knew the key held the power to end it all. The woman's eyes widened in shock. "No," she screamed. "You can't stop me now." But it was too late. With a deep, resonating click, the key turned in the air, and a blinding light filled the hallway, pushing back the darkness, sending it retreating like a shadow at dawn. The woman screamed, her form flickering as if she were being pulled apart by the light. Her body twisted and contorted, but there was no escape. The darkness she had brought into the world was vanishing, unraveling before their eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the darkness was gone. The hallway, once filled with terror and shadows, was now calm. The woman, the source of their fear, was no more. But the light from the key faded, and the room was once again bathed in darkness. The room was eerily quiet. The once trembling walls had calmed, and the oppressive air seemed to have lifted. But the silence that followed felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Femi, Tara, Anita, Cynthia, and Emeka stood motionless in the hallway, their eyes still searching for any sign of danger. The faint glow from the key had faded, leaving only shadows in its wake. I think it's over," Cynthia whispered, her voice trembling as if she were trying to convince herself. Femi's grip tightened around the key, now dull and cold in his hand. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "It's too quiet. Something's wrong." Tara stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the dark corners of the room. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like the air is heavier now." Anita nodded, her eyes wide with apprehension. "It's like the darkness is still here, but hiding." Emeka, always the skeptic, shook his head. "We destroyed her. The curse is broken, right? It should be over." But Femi wasn't convinced. He could feel the air around them shifting, and despite the apparent calm, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at the back of his mind. "I don't think we've seen the last of this," he said. "Whatever we just did, it didn't feel final." Just as he finished speaking, a soft whisper broke through the silence, a voice that sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You think it's over?" The voice was cold, devoid of warmth, and it sent a chill down their spines. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, stretching out like tendrils creeping along the floor. The walls, once sturdy and unyielding, began to pulse with an unsettling rhythm. "You've only scratched the surface," the voice continued, growing louder, more distinct. "The curse cannot be undone so easily." A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the dim light that had remained. For a moment, they were plunged into complete darkness. Their breathing quickened, the fear settling in their bones like ice. But then, slowly, the shadows began to take shape. They formed into figures, indistinct at first, but gradually becoming clearer. The shadows twisted into familiar forms, forms that sent a jolt of recognition through Femi's heart. "No," he muttered, his voice shaking. "This can't be happening." Tara gasped. "It's them. The people we lost, the ones the darkness took." The figures in the shadows were people they had once known, friends, family members, people who had vanished, leaving nothing but memories and unanswered questions. Their faces were distorted, their eyes empty, hollow, and dark. They were the victims of the curse, drawn into the void by the woman's dark power. And now, it seemed, they had returned. The air around them thickened as the figures began to move, their forms shifting and merging into something darker, something more malevolent. "You cannot escape us," the voice whispered again. "You belong to us now." Femi's heart raced. "We have to fight back," he said, his voice more determined now. "We can't let them take us, too." Tara looked around frantically, searching for anything they could use as a weapon. "The slippers," she said, almost too quietly. "The slippers are the key. We have to use them." Femi's eyes widened. "The slippers? But how?" Anita's face paled, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the dark figures surrounding them. "We have to face them. We have to confront the curse head-on. The slippers, they're not just a symbol. They're a part of this. They conceal the darkness away." The shadows swirled closer, their twisted forms reaching out for them, as if the darkness itself was alive and hungry. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, drowning out all other sounds. "You can't escape," they chanted in unison. "You will join us." Femi's mind raced. He looked at Tara, who held the slippers tightly in her hands. He knew they had to act fast, but how? The figures were growing more powerful, and their presence was suffocating. "Focus," Femi said, his voice sharp. "We need to channel everything we have into the slippers. We have to believe that they conceal the curse once and for all." Tara nodded, her grip on the slippers tightening. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she focused all her energy into the object that had caused them so much trouble. She could feel the power of the slippers now, the ancient energy that had been woven into them long before she had ever laid eyes on them. The darkness closed in, but Tara didn't waver. She whispered the words she had only half understood when they first began this journey. Words she felt deep in her soul. "I call upon the power of the light," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Let the darkness be banished, and may the curse be undone." The shadows recoiled as if burned by the light that emanated from the slippers. The figures in the darkness screamed in rage, their forms flickering and distorting. But the light from the slippers only grew brighter, pushing the darkness back, step by step. The voice, which had once been cold and mocking, now screamed in fury. "You cannot win." But Tara, Femi, Anita, and the others stood firm, their collective will pouring into the slippers. The light grew, expanding outward until it was blinding. The shadows began to disintegrate, their forms melting away like smoke in the wind. But just before the darkness could be completely banished, something else stirred, something deeper, darker. Femi could feel it, a presence watching them, waiting. "You cannot stop what is already inside of you," the voice hissed, now faint, but still lingering in the air. "The curse will return." And then, as if the world itself had taken a breath, the light from the slippers pulsed one final time, and everything went silent. The darkness was gone, but Femi knew, deep down, that it was not over. The silence that followed the blinding light was deafening. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had frozen, holding its breath. Femi, Tara, Anita, Cynthia, and Emeka stood in the dim hallway, their faces flushed with the exertion of the moment. The shadows were gone, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air, thick and heavy. Femi was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it truly over?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as if the very fabric of reality was still in flux. Tara's hand trembled around the slippers, now dull and lifeless in her grip. The ancient power that had once emanated from them had faded, leaving behind only a cold, empty shell. "I don't know," Tara murmured, her voice strained. "It feels like something is still watching us." Emeka frowned. "What do you mean, something is watching us?" "We just defeated it." Anita shook her head, her eyes distant. "No, I feel it too. There's something more, something deeper than the curse we've just faced." Cynthia, who had been silent up until that point, spoke with a tremor in her voice. "Do you remember what the voice said?" "It said the curse would return. And it seemed like it was inside of us, waiting." Femi nodded slowly. "It didn't feel like we just defeated the curse. It felt like we merely pushed it back, for now." Tara's brow furrowed. "Then what do we do? If it's not over, how do we fight it? I don't want to keep running from this thing." "We can't run anymore," Femi said firmly. "We have to face it head-on." As he spoke, a strange sensation washed over him, like the very walls around them were closing in. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop, and the once peaceful home now felt suffocating, as if the air itself was filled with an unseen presence. Tara shuddered, her eyes darting around the hallway. This isn't just in our heads. Something is here. Right now." Cynthia's face paled as she stepped back. "I don't want to be here. I need to go home." Emeka turned to her, his usual skepticism replaced with an undeniable sense of urgency. "No one is leaving until we figure this out. If the curse is still alive, we need to deal with it before it's too late." But even as he spoke, Femi felt something strange tugging at the edges of his mind, something subtle, yet undeniably real. It was like a cold hand was pressing against his chest, suffocating him from the inside. He could feel the presence growing, the pressure mounting. It wasn't just the curse, it was something far older, something that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the room seemed to darken once more. The light from the hallway flickered and dimmed, and for the briefest of moments, the world seemed to warp around them. "What's happening?" Anita gasped, her voice shaking with fear. "The walls, they're moving." Femi turned toward the entrance to the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, forming shapes, no longer just formless darkness, but creatures, figures with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. They were slowly inching closer, their forms becoming more distinct. "Those aren't the same shadows," Tara whispered, her eyes wide with terror. They're worse. They've evolved." Emeka's voice trembled. "Are those people?" Femi's heart raced. No, these weren't people, not anymore. These figures were something else, something born from the very core of the curse itself. And they were moving toward them, slowly but relentlessly. The air became thick with the stench of decay, and a soft, guttural whisper filled the room. "You think you've won? You think you've escaped? The curse is not just a force, it is a part of you. It always has been." The voice echoed in their minds, clawing at their sanity. Femi clenched his fists, his body trembling as he tried to resist the voice's pull. He knew now, this wasn't just a curse. This was an entity, an ancient force that had burrowed into their very souls. Tara's voice was sharp, desperate. "What do we do? How do we stop this?" Femi didn't know. He didn't have the answers. But he felt the truth settling in, the shadows, the whispers, the presence. It was all connected to something far deeper than they had realized. They had opened something they couldn't understand, and now it was closing in on them. The figures in the shadows continued to move toward them, their eyes glowing brighter, their mouths stretched into grotesque, silent grins. The temperature dropped even further, and frost began to form along the walls. "It's no use," Emeka said, his voice strained. "We're trapped. There's nowhere to run." But Femi refused to give in. "We're not trapped," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "There has to be a way out of this. We've come this far. We've already fought the curse. We can do it again." The shadows seemed to recoil at his words, as if they understood the challenge he was issuing. The presence in the room grew heavier, suffocating them, pressing them closer to the edge of madness. Femi could feel his breath shortening, his heart racing faster with every passing second. He knew they didn't have much time. Tara stepped forward, holding the slippers out in front of her. "The slippers," she whispered, almost to herself. "The power was in them before. Maybe it's still inside." Femi reached for her hand. "Tara, we don't know if that's going to work again. But we have to try." The figure closest to them, its yellow eyes burning with malevolent intent, took a step forward, its voice dripping with malice. "You will never be free of us. The curse, it's already inside." Suddenly, a chilling realization struck Femi. The curse wasn't just something they could fight or banish. It was something that had been passed down through generations, a part of their blood, their very essence. It wasn't an outside force, it was already in them. And as the figure advanced, Femi could feel the curse stirring deep within him, clawing its way to the surface. The battle was only just beginning. The cold pressure in the room intensified as the figure with burning yellow eyes drew nearer. Its presence felt like an oppressive weight pressing down on their chests, suffocating them with each passing moment. Femi's heart hammered in his chest, his breath shallow, as the cursed figure loomed closer, its malevolent smile twisting into something both familiar and terrifying. "We're not just fighting the curse," Tara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not just an external force anymore. It's inside us. It's been inside us all along." Emeka clenched his fists, his eyes wild with panic. "But how? How do we fight something that's already inside us?" The darkness around them seemed to pulse in rhythm with their anxiety, the shadows swirling in tight, jagged patterns. The whispers that had once been distant now became a chorus, a cacophony of voices echoing in their minds, each one more maddening than the last. "You were never free," the voice murmured, its tone dark and mocking. "The curse has always been here. It's a part of you. You cannot escape." Femi fought to steady his breath, but the realization clawed at him, threatening to unravel everything he thought he knew. Tara was right. The curse wasn't an outside force anymore. It had embedded itself into their very being, tying itself to their blood and bones, something far more insidious than they had ever imagined. As the shadows closed in around them, Femi felt the stirrings of something deep inside him, something cold, something dark. The presence wasn't just in the room. It was inside him, too. Tara reached out and grabbed his arm, her fingers cold against his skin. "Femi, stay with me. We can't let it take over." He looked at her, fear mirrored in her eyes, but behind the fear was a flicker of determination. "But how? How do we fight this when it's already inside us?" Cynthia, standing nearby, stepped forward, her voice uncertain but steady. The slippers, they were the only thing that could stop the curse before. Maybe they can help now, too. Femi's eyes went to the slippers in Tara's hands. They had brought them this far, but could they really hold the power to banish something so deeply rooted, something that was now part of them? "We have to use the slippers," Femi said, though doubt lingered in his voice. "But we can't just focus on banishing it. We need to confront what's inside us, too." The shadows swirled around them, their forms becoming more distinct, more monstrous with each passing second. They twisted and contorted, moving like dark, malefic creatures crawling from the depths of their fears. The voices grew louder, their words now indistinguishable from the storm of thoughts racing through Femi's mind. "You are ours," the voices chanted. "You were always meant to be ours." The figure with yellow eyes advanced, its smile stretching wider, its shape shifting into something monstrous, something beyond human comprehension. The air grew thick with its presence, and Femi could feel the curse pulsing within him, a dark seed planted deep in his soul, slowly but surely growing. "Don't listen to them," Tara said, her voice firm, though she, too, was trembling. We can't let them take us. We have to fight. Femi nodded, his gaze now fixed on the slippers in her hands. He reached out and grabbed them, feeling the remnants of the ancient power coursing through the fabric. There was still a flicker of light, faint but undeniable. It wasn't gone, it was just hidden, waiting for them to find it. We have to focus, Femi said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. We need to use the slippers, but this time we have to go deeper. The curse isn't just something we can banish. It's part of us. We have to face it, accept it, and then we can destroy it. Tara nodded slowly, her eyes locked on the darkness that was now closing in on them. Let's do it. Femi took a deep breath and turned to face the figure with yellow eyes. You think we belong to you? You think we're yours? No. We may have been marked by you, but we are not your puppets. We choose to fight. We choose to live. The figure let out a low growl, its eyes glowing brighter as it advanced. You cannot resist forever. You belong to us. We are the darkness, and the darkness is within you. But Femi didn't back down. With a fierce grip on the slippers, he stepped forward. Tara followed his lead, her hand steady beside his, her eyes full of resolve. Let's go deeper, Femi whispered, focusing his mind. Together. The shadows seemed to press in on them from all sides, but instead of retreating, Femi leaned into it. The curse, the darkness inside them, was not just an external force. It was a part of their history, of their past. It was a fear they had never confronted, a wound that had never healed. Now, they had to face it head-on. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the darkness inside, to acknowledge it for what it was. It wasn't something to be destroyed, it was something that had to be understood. Only then could they free themselves from it. Tara's voice was a soft anchor in the storm. Focus, Femi. Focus on the light. The slippers in his hands began to warm, the faint glow flickering in time with his heartbeat. The more he embraced the darkness within, the more he felt the slippers responding, as if they too understood that this wasn't about banishment. It was about balance. The figure in front of them screamed in rage, its form flickering as if torn between two worlds. The shadows shrieked, their forms writhing and stretching, but they were weakening, slowly being pushed back by the force of Femi's will. We are not yours, Tara whispered, her voice a final declaration. The darkness recoiled, its strength faltering as the light from the slippers grew stronger. The presence inside Femi and Tara, a presence that had once been a seed of fear and darkness, began to shrink, to dissipate, like smoke in the wind. But even as the shadows faded, something else remained, something far more elusive. A lingering presence, a reminder that this fight wasn't over. Femi, Tara whispered, her voice full of concern. It's still here. It's still inside. Femi's chest tightened. The curse was not gone. It was still there, deep within. But they had made progress. The battle was far from over. We'll face it together, he said, his voice steady, though the uncertainty lingered in his heart. And as the last of the shadows disappeared, the true nature of their struggle became clear. This was not just a fight against an ancient curse. This was a fight to reclaim themselves against the darkness inside, and the one that had been watching from the shadows all along. The room was quiet now, the oppressive darkness having receded. But the silence felt like the calm before the storm. Femi stood motionless, his hand still gripping the slippers, their warm glow now dimming to a faint, almost imperceptible light. Tara's hand was still clutching his arm, her grip firm yet trembling. The curse, the darkness that had taken root in their lives, wasn't gone. It had only been pushed back, and in its retreat it had left something else behind. Something that felt worse than the shadows that had once threatened to consume them. Femi could feel it. That deep, gnawing presence inside him. The coldness, the fear, and the lingering doubt that now filled every empty space in his chest. We've only just begun, Tara said softly, her voice a whisper against the stillness. Femi turned his head to look at her, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. What do you mean? Tara glanced toward the doorway, her gaze distant. The darkness inside us, it's not over. Not yet. Before he could respond, a cold wind gusted through the room, flicking the curtains aside and making the temperature drop. Femi's heart raced as he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. Then, he saw it. A shadow, tall, dark, and unmistakable, emerged from the doorway. "You think you've won?" The voice was low, almost mocking, and yet it felt deeply familiar. Femi's blood ran cold. The voice had been in his head for so long, but hearing it outside of his mind was something far more terrifying. A figure stepped fully into the room, tall and imposing, its features twisted into something inhuman. The figure wore the same yellow eyes that had haunted him for so long, but now the eyes were filled with a malevolent glee. "You think the curse can be stopped so easily?" the figure sneered. "You think you can banish me with some trinkets and simple willpower?" Femi felt his body freeze. The slippers in his hands felt heavier now, their light flickering like a dying candle. Tara stepped closer to him, her hand on his shoulder. "We don't need to banish you," Tara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to face you." The figure's lips curled into a smile, and it moved toward them, its form shifting, twisting with each step it took. The shadows seemed to bleed from its body, forming shapes that danced and slithered in the corners of the room. "You've always had the power to defeat me," the figure said, its voice echoing through their minds. "But you never knew how to use it. You never knew how to truly face me." Femi stepped forward, his grip tightening around the slippers. "We know now," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We know that the power to fight you isn't just in the slippers. It's in us." The figure's expression twisted, its eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You truly think you can defeat me from within? You think you can stop what has already been woven into your souls?" Tara looked at Femi, and for a moment, they were both silent, each knowing the truth of what the figure said. The curse had been inside them all along. It wasn't just an external force that could be banished. It was part of their history, their fears, their struggles. They couldn't run from it. They had to face it. "Femi, it's not just about fighting the curse," Tara said softly. "It's about accepting it. Understanding it. And then we can move beyond it." Femi's heart pounded in his chest. Could he really face the darkness within him? Could he accept the curse that had festered inside him for so long? "Yes," he said, his voice low but strong. "It's part of us. But it doesn't define us. We are not the curse." The figure recoiled slightly, its grin faltering. "You're still so foolish." Femi closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself. He felt the cold, the fear, the anger, the darkness that had been there for as long as he could remember. But now, he did something he hadn't done before. He didn't try to push it away. He didn't try to fight it. Instead, he let it in. Let it become a part of him. The slippers in his hands began to glow once again, the light growing brighter, not in a blinding, forceful way, but in a steady, calm pulse. Tara's presence beside him was a comforting anchor as he embraced the darkness and then slowly, deliberately, pushed it back. Not with force, but with understanding. The figure faltered, its form flickering as Femi's calm determination began to erode its power. Tara stepped forward with him, her hand firmly placed on his, both of them now working in unison to confront the curse they had always feared. "You've been feeding off our fear for too long," Tara said, her voice now steady and clear. "But no more." The figure's form began to twist and shift, as if it were caught in a storm of its own creation. It screamed, an awful, guttural sound, as its body began to disintegrate into the shadows, the darkness swirling around it like a vortex. "We control our fate," Femi added, his voice gaining strength. "You don't own us anymore." With a final, deafening shriek, the figure collapsed, its form dissolving into nothingness, leaving nothing behind but an eerie silence. Femi and Tara stood together, breathing heavily, their bodies still tense but their hearts lighter than they had been in a long time. The curse was not gone, but it had been banished from their lives. They had confronted it, and in doing so, they had reclaimed their freedom. But as the last remnants of the curse faded, Femi felt a strange unease. Was this truly the end? Or was it only the beginning of something else? "I think it's over," Tara said, looking up at Femi, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. Femi nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had only just begun to scratch the surface of what lay ahead. The curse had been defeated, but the darkness, the fear, and the shadows, they were still a part of them. And as long as they lived, they would have to carry that burden. But now, they were stronger. And together, they would face whatever came next. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. The sun was rising over Paco City, casting a soft orange light over the quiet neighborhood. Everything looked normal. Children were preparing for school. Traders were opening their kiosks. Buses were honking in the distance. But inside the small compound where Femi and Tara lived, nothing felt normal anymore. Femi sat outside their door, his elbows on his knees, staring at the pair of slippers that now looked ordinary, just old, worn brown slippers with fading red markings on the soles. They didn't glow anymore. They didn't whisper. But they still held weight. Tara stepped outside with a cup of tea and placed it beside him. She didn't say a word at first. She just sat beside her husband and sighed. "It feels like it's over," she whispered. Femi shook his head slowly. "It's quiet, yes. But something's not right." They sat in silence, sipping tea, watching as their neighbors went about their usual business. That's when they saw her. An old woman in a white head tie and wrapper walked slowly into the compound, her steps heavy and her eyes tired. She held something wrapped in a black cloth. Her face was unfamiliar, but her presence made Tara's stomach twist. The woman walked straight toward them without saying a word. Femi stood quickly, stepping between the woman and his wife. "Can we help you?" he asked carefully. The woman didn't answer. She stared at the slippers on the ground and pointed at them with her long, bony finger. "You left them out again." Femi froze. "What?" She nodded slowly. "I said, you left them outside again. Last night." Tara looked down. "No. We didn't. We brought them inside. We kept them in the kitchen." The woman shook her head. "You kept a pair inside." But this, she unwrapped the cloth in her hand, revealing another pair, the exact same slippers. Old, dusty, with red faded markings. Tara gasped. "How?" "There are always two pairs," the woman whispered. "One you wear. One that watches you." Femi stepped back, his heart racing. "Who are you?" The woman didn't respond. Instead, she bent slowly and placed the second pair beside the first. Then she stood and gave a thin, sad smile. "They always return. Whether you believe in them or not. Whether you want them or not. As long as the door opens at night, they will come." She turned to leave, her feet dragging across the sand. Femi tried to follow, but as soon as she reached the gate, she vanished. One moment she was there. The next, gone. Tara grabbed Femi's hand. "What does this mean? Are we cursed forever?" Femi didn't answer. He stared at the two identical pairs of slippers now sitting outside their door. For slippers. No glow. No voices. Just waiting. Then, as the wind passed through the compound, Femi heard it again, a whisper. "We never left. You only forgot to listen."